Hey there, welcome back to my kitchen. Today I'm feeling nostalgic. I have out one of my Christmas presents, apparently from 2010, from my mom. It's called Recipe Book. And as the name implies, there are a whole bunch of recipes, all recipes that she loved making that were some of her favorites. I was looking through this cookbook this morning because it's the 5th anniversary of when we lost my mom today. I started remembering then that the first dish I remember cooking on my own 35 years ago probably was a cake. We just box cake mix, oil and eggs usually, and you mix them up and you cook them and you're done. It was really the first time that my mom let me alone in the kitchen. I had 1,000 questions, everything from how do I know when the oven is preheated to how do I know if I've mixed enough. That experience taught me that I could experiment in the kitchen and that it would be not always successful, but I would always learn something. So I think back to that time and that memory with so much joy and so much appreciation for my mom. So today I wanted to cook something sweet and lemony, and I started going through this dessert section as well as a couple other of her cookbooks. And I see all sorts of lemon things. Either I didn't have the ingredients for them or they felt not appropriate for the season. Like this one, lemon cream and balsamic strawberry Napoleons, sounds delightful, but I'd rather have it when strawberries are in season, so a little bit later in the summer. There's one here, I think from my grandmother. It's labeled My Mom's. It's really hard to read, but it looks like it's yellow cake mix and lemon pudding. I didn't find exactly the recipe that I wanted, but I've got so much inspiration from just seeing her handwriting and thinking about the things that she used to make. So I did a quick search and found a beautiful lemon cake that I can really control the amount of lemon zest and lemon juice to bump up the flavor, and that's what I'm gonna do today. So we'll save this recipe book for later, but using my mom as an inspiration and all of the citrus that I have in my fridge, today we're gonna make a lemon cake with lemon buttercream icing. So I hope you'll stick around. So this cake is a little bit unique in that it has butter, which I remembered to soften, abnormal. We're gonna save this to use on our cake tins. And it has olive oil. That's the unique ingredient. Many cakes have olive oil, but I've not made a lemon cake in this way really before. So we're gonna go for a 1/2 cup of olive oil. Everything, oh, perfectly a 1/2 cup. Put that right in. So 1/2 cup of butter, which is 1 stick, 1/2 cup of olive oil, and then we're going for 1 3/4 cups of granulated sugar. And 1 cup, so that's 1 3/4 cups. We're gonna turn this on and add a couple more ingredients while it whisks together. At this point, I'm gonna add a splash of vanilla. And we're looking for this to lighten in color, which it has. So let me just show you. See how light it's gotten? It looks a little bit more fluffy, just looks nice and beautiful. So put that back in. 3 eggs. 2 eggs. Some recipes call to add the eggs one at a time. Maybe it could benefit from that, but again, I'm not super fussy. Okay, that looks great. It's nice and light, fluffy. You can see how beautiful the color is. Now we're gonna add the buttermilk. So just a cup of buttermilk goes right in. Get the remnants of that oil as well. And this we're gonna beat slowly until it's well incorporated. This is one of my favorite kitchen tools. It's called a microplane. Our oven is preheated. It's called a microplane. It was originally a woodworking tool called a rasp, but it's been adapted years and years ago for the kitchen. It works really well for zesting fruit, for grating cheese, for grating nutmeg. You can use this thing really for anything. Now you'll notice I'm being very careful to only get a little bit of that white part. That is called the pith. You don't want the pith because it ends up tasting bitter, but don't be too particular about it. Just do your best to take off as much of that lemon zest as is possible. Okay. Look at all that beautiful lemon zest. Now my favorite part is that a lot of it sticks to the back of the microplane. So if you give the microplane a little whack on your bench, you'll see you have a ton of lemon zest. So this is a ton. I'm not gonna use all of this actually in the cake. I'll probably reserve a couple tablespoons of this for the buttercream frosting that we're gonna add to this cake. If you're gonna make something a specific flavor, why make it subtle? Why not just go for broke? So we're gonna add the zest in, and then we've got to add lemon juice in as well. So cut a couple of these. So I've probably gotten 1/4 cup of lemon juice, which is certainly more than the recipe calls for. We're going lemony, so why not just double down on the lemon? We may have to add a little bit more flour, just so we're not adding too much liquid into the cake. Now we're gonna incorporate the zest and the juice into this mixture. The recipe calls for 8-inch cake tins. I have like 10-inch cake tins, and then I have these 6.5-inch cake tins. I'm gonna go for the little guys today. This could be a mistake, so I'm gonna bake these on top of a cookie sheet since I've not used them with this recipe before. The intent is to have a taller cake with a couple of layers, and I just think a taller cake is a little bit more impressive than a wide, flat cake. So we'll definitely have a couple layers with this. We may even have to stake it so that it doesn't fall over, but we'll see when we get to that point. So I'm gonna prepare these pans. We could use butter, you could use olive oil. I just ran out of olive oil, as you saw. You could use some other neutral flavored oil. On this one, I need a little bit more, so I'm gonna add whatever comes to my hand first, which happens to be avocado oil. Add a little here too, just for good measure. I'm going all the way up the sides on these tiny little pans because I expect, hopefully, our cake will rise. So you're just gonna add, no specific measurement. That's probably a couple tablespoons of flour. I might add a little bit more. And what we're doing in this step is just kind of working that flour around so that it covers the oil to create a truly non-stick surface. So you can see truly a non-stick surface. They're pretty small for the amount of cake batter that we have, so if something happens to cook over, we've got ourselves covered. It won't be too much of a mess. Here we go. I think we've got all the dry ingredients that we need. So one of the things that I do like to do is just scoop it up a little bit, get it on the bench. It's not a party until you have a little flour on the bench, and then measure that way. So that's 1 cup. Shaking it off, that's 2 cups. That's 2.5 cups. I always have to look and read because I always confuse baking soda and baking powder, even though I've been cooking for 35 years. 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Perfect. And 1 3/4 teaspoons of baking powder. That's 1 teaspoon. 3/4 teaspoon. Now, I've certainly messed up baking soda and baking powder many, many times. These are the leavening agent in the cake. I would encourage you, even if you make a mistake on the leavening ingredients, still to keep persevering because you never know, it could turn out just fine. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, the last ingredient is 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm gonna measure the salt. Now, just give this a quick whisk, and we're gonna incorporate it into our batter. And start really low so we're not wearing more flour than we're already wearing. It's looking beautiful. Smooth and velvety and frankly beautiful. I've got to scrape the sides down of this bowl. Flour still left on the beater. Controversially, I'm a fan of tasting things at every phase that you make them. Probably not chicken or maybe some pork or other raw meats, but in this case, even though there are raw eggs, I'm gonna taste this. It's exactly lemony like I wanted it to be. We definitely bumped up the amount of lemon juice in this cake, so I'm gonna accommodate for that by adding a little bit more flour. So this is like a heaping tablespoon of flour that I'm adding. I'll probably add 2 of those. Okay, I think we did it. Go ahead and pull this up and off. So, looks beautiful. We do have some unincorporated lemon zest there. So let's get that incorporated. So now we're gonna do our best to divide this in halvesies between these 2 small pans. I'm not sure it's all gonna fit, to be honest. So we may do our best, and I'm gonna try to fill it like 3/4 of the way up. If I've got extra, I'll make maybe some cupcakes. We'll see what happens. I can see those flecks of lemon zest. Perfect. So the fussy thing you can do is kind of even out the top, but I almost never do that. I have 2 dogs, and they seem to know right when there's something to lick or something to be scavenged for on the floor. And this one feels like he's gonna get some of this cake, but he is absolutely not. So it's ready to go in the oven. So usually when things are thicker, they take a little bit longer to cook all the way through. There's a couple foolproof ways to tell when a cake is done. The first is that your nose will know. If you start to smell it, it's a good idea to give it a test. And what we're looking for is light golden brown and starting to pull away from the edges of the pan. When you touch it, it doesn't leave a dent, it springs back a little bit, it feels like kind of springy cake. And then the most foolproof way is to insert a cake tester into the center, and when it comes out clean, it's ready to go. So I'm gonna put these into our preheated oven, set a timer for 28 minutes, but pay attention. I'm gonna pay attention with my nose and maybe check it a couple times since our cake tins are not exactly the same size. So into the oven these go. On the center rack, and then we'll set a timer for 20 minutes and see where that gets us. And we have a dog. Okay, see you in a sec. All right, our cake is still in the oven. It's time to start on our buttercream. Cream cheese, butter, lemon juice, lemon zest, confectioner's sugar. The recipe also calls for a couple drops of food coloring. I'm not gonna add that, but what I am gonna add is some vanilla. Can't get away from adding vanilla to just about everything that I bake. And a little bit of salt just to balance all of the sweetness. We're gonna add 4 ounces of cream cheese at room temperature. Now, if your ingredients aren't at room temperature, it's not the end of the world. It does make it a little bit more difficult to incorporate them all together and make a real light and fluffy buttercream, but I've done it that way before and it works just fine. We're not professionals here, which is the beauty of my kitchen, is that we get to experiment and play around, and it's exactly what my mom would have wanted. That day that I made that lemon yellow box cake was an interesting day. I remember it so clearly. I had questions about every single step of the process, like how do you crack an egg? How do I measure the oil? And she wouldn't really help me. She just said, go try it. What's the worst that can happen? Go try it. I think I learned more about cooking, and the consequences of cooking are so low. Like, if this doesn't turn out, it's not the end of the world. We'll learn from it if something doesn't turn out appropriately. So I would encourage you to be the same way. If you're new in the kitchen, just learning how to cook or bake, why not give it a try? Just do your best to experiment in a way that you can learn from your experiments for the next one. Okay, enough blabbing. So I'm gonna add just a pinch of salt. I add salt to almost everything sweet. It just balances the flavors a little bit. Vanilla. Again, not in the recipe, but gotta add it. I have some lemon extract as well, but I wanted to keep this a little bit more on the natural lemon flavor. That lemon extract can sometimes go to pledge pretty quickly. Okay, so it calls for 1 tablespoon of zest. This is probably a solid 2 tablespoons of zest, but I love it. So adjust up or down as per your liking. And then it calls for the juice from 1 lemon. I'm gonna add a couple. They're too big to fit in my juicer. And normally I would juice these over my palm just to catch any of the seeds, but as I mentioned, these are seedless lemons. Okay, we're blended. I'm gonna start gradually adding the powdered sugar. Now the thing with powdered sugar is you wanna be incredibly careful with powdered sugar adding it to the wet ingredients, because otherwise you'll be wearing it. And I'm already wearing enough food as it is. So it calls for 5.5 cups. Not sure if that's how much we'll need. I'm gonna go ahead and add a couple of cups to start. So 1 cup. 2 cups. We'll let that incorporate a little bit, but again, being very careful. I may even pulse the mixer. Now we're good. Here what we're looking for is texture. So we want a buttercream that's solid enough that it can keep the cakes together and set up well in the fridge. It's still very, very loose. So we're at 2 cups, we're gonna keep going. 3 cups, 4 cups. The way I measure would probably drive professional bakers crazy, but for this, it's Really not that big of a deal. It's incorporated nicely. You can see that it's still pretty loose. We want a buttercream that's a little bit tighter than that, so 5 cups. I'm gonna do the full 5.5 and see where that gets us. Again, start slow. Let me pull it out and show you. So you can see the texture is still a little bit loose. I think I'm gonna add another 1/2 cup, but first I'm going to scrape down the sides of the bowl. And we're going for another 1/2 cup, and I think that's gonna be good. You're really just feeling out the right texture. All right, so this is a 20-minute timer. I'm certain they're not done yet. Yeah, they're definitely not done. They're way too light, but they're looking beautiful. Call it another 10 minutes. That'll take us to 30 minutes, which is probably getting pretty close to what we want. Back to the buttercream. Before we were interrupted with our timer, I just added a 1/6 cup, so we had 5.5. I added another 1/2 cup to this buttercream. I scraped on the sides of the bowl, and now we're going to just give her one final mix. I can see why the Pioneer woman might have wanted to add a little bit of yellow food coloring to this. It would turn it more obviously lemon flavored, but I'm gonna try to do some cool decorating. I might try to candy some lemons, actually. I think this is done. If you look at the beautiful color, and we gotta give it a taste. Nice and lemony, pretty tart, but also very sweet. I'm also happy that we added a little bit extra sugar, which will make a little bit more frosting. It's actually frosting, even though maybe I've been calling it icing too, because we're gonna have a few cake layers. So I wanna ensure that we can have sufficient frosting between each of those layers. Okay, we have beautiful buttercream. We've got our buttercream done. Now we're just waiting for our cakes to cook and cool. Toss these in the fridge, and I'll be back with you when our next timer goes off. That's our timer. Okay, they're not quite done yet, I can tell for sure. There's no golden brown at the edges. The centers are still quite wiggly. So we're gonna keep going. We're at 30 minutes total. We set a 20-minute timer and then a 10-minute timer. So I'm gonna add another 10 minutes on the timer to get us to about 40 minutes. We'll see, I'm gonna keep smelling in the interim. I'm gonna do something that I've actually never done before. I'm going to candy some lemon slices. It seems to be pretty easy, and many of the recipes that I've seen are just equal parts sugar and water simmered until the sugar dissolves, adding thinly sliced lemon slices, cooking for 30 to 40 to 50 minutes until they're translucent, and then laying them out to dry. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get a cup of water and a cup of sugar in my saucepan. I think I'm just trying to get this sugar melted. And we don't want to get any color on it. We're not trying to make caramel. We're just trying to get that sugar melted. Okay, it looks like all of the sugar's melted. Being very careful because hot sugar hurts. We're gonna test our cake. I've grabbed a cake tester, which in my world happens to be a skewer. You can use a toothpick, you can use an actual cake tester, you could use a metal skewer, or you could even use a knife, but that will put a little hole in your cake. So let's take these bad boys out. They're looking beautiful. So I'm touching them and they're springing back. You can see that they're golden brown around the edges and starting to pull away from the sides of the pan. I'm gonna go ahead and insert a cake tester into the center. Ooh, not done. I'm glad we tried that because there's still a fair amount of batter on this cake. So it's now been about 32 minutes. I'm gonna keep going. What I am gonna do, however, is cover them with foil because they're getting just about as brown as I want them. I don't want them to get too dark. And back in the oven they go. I've got my timer set now for my lemon slices that I'm trying to candy. And all I've done with these is put them so that the temperature is on kind of a low simmer. We're just getting some bubbles, so it's somewhere between low and medium. Google has told me that the best way to determine when they're done is when they turn translucent. Okay, checking in. So my next timer went off. I don't even know how many minutes we're at now. Maybe 20, 30, 40, 50. Let's see how we're doing. Ooh, yeah. So it's still golden brown, pulling away from the sides of the pan. It's not gotten much more golden because of the tin foil that we put over it. And I'm gonna try it again. Clean. It's coming out clean. I think we're done. When I touch it, it springs back. It feels like cooked cake. So we're done. We're back with some cooled cakes, and it's time to frost them. So I took my buttercream out of the fridge about 15 minutes ago just to let it soften up. I've got a serrated knife because I'm gonna actually cut the cakes and put them into layers. I've got a little offset spatula and then just a little straight flat spatula. I've got the cake plate that I'm gonna put the finished cake on, and then the turntable. You don't need one of these, but it does make icing a little bit easier. The one thing I forgot is this simple syrup. This is what came off lemons that are currently in the freezer, trying to get them to harden up a little bit. With the sound of a Tupperware opening, of course, we've got a couple dogs. I'll give you the dog cam the way that they were a few minutes ago. So the first thing that we're gonna do is actually level off the top of each of these cakes and cut each of them into 2 layers. Gently run my knife, serrated knife, around the top. Try to keep it flat. These are actually not too humped. There's not really a hump in the middle of these, but I'm still gonna do it, both to taste a little bit, that's the chef's treat, but also to try to ensure that we've got the flattest surface possible. Okay, and then we'll just flip this right off onto the very clean bench. There we go, so we've got a nice flat surface. Looks nice and well cooked. And now I'm going to estimate what half of this is, and just do a guideline all the way around. Try to hit my own guideline there. And we made it through. Awesome. There we go, perfect. So these cakes feel actually quite nice, quite moist, but I'm gonna add just a little bit of this, what actually is simple syrup. I think I might be able to use this even for like making cocktails. So I'm not gonna dip my brush back in there. I'm gonna decant some of it. This is gonna add just a little bit more moisture into the cake, more flavor. Brush some of those crumbs off. Okay, put this to the side. I'm actually gonna taste a little bit of it. I tasted it right when I took them out, but let's see. Delightful. You would like some, wouldn't you? Not gonna happen though. All right, so I have a clean bench. I have a couple of cakes that have been split in half and soaked with our candied lemon simple syrup. I have my cake turntable. So the first thing I'm gonna do is put a little bit of buttercream icing on the middle of the turntable. And the point of that is so that we have a solid, non-slippery base for our first cake. We're gonna transfer these 4 cake layers stacked over to this cake plate, which is where it's gonna be served. But at the moment, we're gonna build it on the turntable to make icing easier. So all I'm gonna do is take my first layer of cake, set it down in the center of the turntable, and add a little bit of buttercream. I actually prefer the offset spatula for this first layering job. I've got a loud turntable here, so apologies for the noise. But I'm taking enough so that there's a good solid layer in between, but so that it's not so much that it's gonna like run out of the cake when we put some weight on top of the cake. And it's no big deal. You see some of it is going over the side. It's no big deal. We're gonna crumb coat. That's what this initial coat is called, to keep the crumbs in. We're gonna crumb coat the entire cake in frosting. So it's okay if this is a little bit messy at this point. That's beautiful. Next cake, next. So I'm gonna try to place it in such a way that the top looks relatively flat. And a lot can be done with frosting. I use the terms icing and frosting interchangeably. They are not the same thing. This is frosting. But a lot can be done with adding frosting to these layers. You can make frosting a little bit thicker in one area and thinner in another so that the cake appears level. So I'm just being really gentle because there are still crumbs on the top of this cake. And you'll see I'm just rotating the turntable around as I gently rotate my offset spatula, trying to get a flat surface. Sometimes you need to get kind of on the level of the cake to see if your surface is actually flat. And I'm just kind of trying to maneuver these guys so that the walls are pretty straight. Good enough. We're going to add a little bit more buttercream. And you can see it's starting to get a little bit loosey-goosey on me. So I'm just going to be really careful with what we do here. I am definitely not a professional at this, but with patience and the appropriate amount of refrigeration, I think we can make it through. So part of the reason we do it on a turntable before we actually add it to our platter for serving here is so that we can be a little bit more messy. And again, my hands are clean. So we're just going to go ahead and gently frost the rest of this cake. Okay, that's good enough. I think that's where we're going to leave it. I'm going to go ahead and get this crumb-coated cake into the fridge. I'm going to let it cool down until the icing firms up, just to ensure that we've got a nice solid base to put the final frosting on. It's been about 15 minutes. Our cake is now a little bit firmer to touch. It may need another trip into the fridge, but I'm going to try to ice it for the second and final time. So we're just going to repeat the same process that we just did. Icing the cake. The idea is just to ensure that I've got enough icing for the top and push what I don't need over the sides. I am not a professional cake decorator, though I've done a few of these. And truly, this offset spatula is the ticket. That's what helps the most. Okay, so now we start on the sides. I don't think we're going to have to stake this cake. It's standing up okay. Beautiful specks of lemon zest in that frosting, which is cool. Okay, we're getting to the point that I'm about to put some finishing touches on it. So give it a look, make sure it's about even. I actually kind of like it like this. I'm going to do a couple little swirlies in the top, just until I'm happy with the way that it looks. I think we're good. Yeah, so I'm going to transfer this cake onto my final serving dish. And to get the cake not to slip, I'm just going to use some of this buttercream and put it in the center here. So that gives the cake something to hold on to, so it doesn't slip and slide around the platter when we go to cut into it. So just very gently, I'm going to use, this is actually a cake mover or a cake spatula, just a nice big surface area. I'm going to gently maneuver my cake from one platter to the center of the other. Perfect. We had a little bit. Buttercream fixes all ills. And a little bit here. Okay, I think that looks beautiful. I had a quick clean. Now it's time to do a little decorating. Now I think I have a lot of learnings on these. I think they're not dry enough. You can see they're still kind of floppy. And I'm not sure that you can see this, but the center of them is actually gone. So I cut them about the right thickness, I think, but they really should have a center. So these I have not mastered yet, but I think it's kind of a nice little embellishment that I'm going to add on the cake anyway. And we'll see if we can't arrange them in a way that's pretty. So I think what I'm gonna do, the buttercream is still tacky enough that I think I can just arrange them around the cake. Okay, so we're all the way around on the bottom. And now let's do a little pile. Let's see, I'm just kind of bending and twisting. See if I can get them to stay in kind of a unique way. Again, no rhyme or reason. And I've got to taste one, right? They're nice and tart. I'm so pleased with this little lemon cake. You can see the lemons around the bottom. It's not perfect by any means, but I think it will be a delightful contribution to the dinner party I'm going to tomorrow. So we'll cut into it tomorrow. We're gonna have to wait, let it firm up a little bit. But overall, I'm really happy with this. I think the candied lemon was a nice addition. I think the additional lemon zest and lemon juice that I added in the cake mix and in the buttercream were the right move. And then even using the simple syrup that came from candying the lemons as a soak, I think that was great. So I think we achieved our goal of running through some of the citrus in my kitchen, and I got to think about my mom all day long and the happy memories I have with her. So I think she'd be really proud of this. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be back to you when we cut into this beauty in about 24 hours. It's 24 hours later and officially time to see the inside of our masterpiece. We've lost our candied lemons. There we go. How'd we do? Look at those layers. Looks beautiful. The cake looks moist and fluffy. You can see all 4 layers. Very exciting. Okay, let's take a bite. It's so lemony. I'm tasting the lemon soak in the cake that we used from the candied lemons that we made. That is such a good idea. Keeps the cake incredibly moist. You can see the beautiful layers in the cake. Maybe something I'd do different next time. This one was the bottom of one of the cake layers. So perhaps I would actually put that at the bottom so that that brown, darker cake part is at the very bottom. But otherwise, this is such a beautiful cake. Thank you so much for baking with me over the last couple days. I hope you'll try out this recipe and put your own spin on it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.